Sear, our non-stimulant, thermogenic, and recomposition agent. Sear is a super cool product because it's going to help you utilize turning your white adipose tissue, which is for storage of fat, into brown adipose tissue, which is going to help with energy production. So this is great to use for a competition prep or in your weight loss phase. So you can stack it with a stimulant-based thermogenic, or you could also use it in your off-season or muscle building phase to help keep you lean and mean. Sear.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. And I think we owe everybody an apology. We didn't have a episode come out on Monday, right?
Well, we did, but it was not a prep episode. So normally we do our prep team on Monday, our lifestyle team on Thursday, but we had to flip-flop it this week.
Yeah, and I think it was an error on my part. We recorded 2 podcasts back to back, and for whatever reason they didn't save. It only saved the first one. So we will revisit that topic. But this week we're going to review the Pittsburgh Pro, and then we're going to talk about a perfect topic, perfect timing, how to deal with, an unfavorable placing, something that doesn't meet your expectations, and, how to handle that part of this sport, because nobody has ever gone undefeated. So,
There's only one winner.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Pittsburgh Pro. I think it was pretty much what we thought it was going to be, as far as the top 2 battling it out, Ashley and Amy, with Amy coming out with what I believe was a split decision. It was a point. So that means they were, going either way, which Ashley looked better. Amy looked consistent, and, that's where they are. Those girls bring their A game every time.
They do. I thought Ashley looked much tighter than she looked at Girl Power.
Yeah. And that lighting was not making people look harder. It was making people look softer. It was good lighting, but it was just slightly softening people up. So people that were a little overly conditioned looked about right, and people that were a little bit under conditioned looked softer. So, that was just from my naked eye, what I could see, seeing people backstage, seeing them on stage, compared to the Salt Lake lighting, which everyone was freaking out because everyone looked so muscular. That made everyone look bigger and leaner on the video. So these lights can change things. And the reason I remember it is because when the men's physique guys went out first before bikini, and I remember seeing like Ali and Vitor and thinking like, oh, they don't look too crispy. And then I saw them and I was like, oh, they are crispy. So it was the lighting kind of just dulling the details a bit.
And was it that way in person too, as well as like the videos?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. In person. Yeah. In person and videos. Yeah. Cause I remember watching bikini from the crowd and thinking, it did so Paul was right. It was the lighting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as a bodybuilder, you had to have a really dark tan at that show. Overly conditioned looked, about right. Slightly behind conditioning looked like you were 5-6 weeks out, right? Instead of just right there.
Interesting.
So I think that puts Amy at 3 wins this year now: San Diego, Wasatch, Pittsburgh, and I don't see anybody really challenging her for New York.
Yeah, that New York list this weekend is pretty small, and I definitely think she's the front runner there. And I don't think I've ever seen her not show up with a
No. She's been consistent for good knows 3 years now straight. She's just incredible. So
I think towards the end of last year, before Olympia, I think there was a few shows that I don't think she was at her absolute best after she had that long break, but she improved really quickly once again.
Yeah, I mean, to go from, I think I didn't think her Olympia was her best look of the year, but it was still really good. But now she's going to have all this, lessons learned from last year. So she's going to be very much a contender for this year's Miss Olympia title, no doubt.
No. And she's one of those girls that obviously likes to compete too. And I think she thrives off competing. I think she gets better with competing.
And you can certainly understand that. There is a difficulty coming out of prep, turning it off and then turning it back on. The body responds differently. Sometimes it's just smoother if you just kind of stay in it. You look at Ashley. She's been so consistent. She never really, even when she's not at her best, she's still really good. And then she can turn it on when she wants. So I think that's, and this is like, if you look at that lineup, all the girls in the top 5, this was their third or fourth or fifth show of the year, they were really like in the zone. And then, you know, Ari and Brittany, for Brittany, it was her second show of the year. We just missed that first call out getting ninth, but I loved her look. Like she was very, in fact, I think we could have actually tightened her up a little bit just because of the way the lighting was. I was a little concerned she was going to be too hard. But overall, just fullness, shape, everything was there. Ari, we got our feedback. They just want her tighter. They just want her leaner. And this is the job with me and Ari, is still learning, you know, how her body responds. You know, it was probably a bad call on my part at about 6 weeks out to say we were good to go. She was still putting muscle back on from her surgery. So we're going to go back into a little maintenance phase and come back out probably early fall, late summer, when she's at the look that they want her at. But overall, I mean, we knew going into the show that top 8, that first call out was basically going to be a who's who. India made a big leap forward from last year. It was really good to see her back at a much like leaner physique. I don't think she even got that lean last year. So that first group, Brittany Gillespie, Maria Costa, Vanya, they all looked fantastic. I was, you know, I was definitely impressed. And so it's,
Yeah, Tara looked great as well. She
Tara,
ended
yeah,
up in
Tara's-
place. I thought it was funny because I know a lot of people were commenting on this, but that whole, well, the top, all of the top 4 was in red, and then your 5th place Tara was in pink. So it, like, there were a lot of red suits on stage on on Friday for sure.
Yeah,
Let me
I
ask you a
think
question.
certain stages we know certain colors look good on, right? So like the Pittsburgh Pro stage, red looks good on that stage. They had a blue backdrop, very dark, red pops. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you,
Yeah,
Leslie, because I know you do a lot with bikinis. I've heard a few girls tell a bunch of my clients that red is a very risky color. I never heard that.
Well, okay, so I definitely, I think I know where that comes from. I definitely don't think it's kind of, I would consider it to be somewhat of a jewel tone. I think it can work for most people. However, I think it also depends what shade of red you do. If you do like a ruby red with not a lot of contrast, it can have the potential to maybe not blend in, but kind of mesh with your tan. So if you are somebody who has more of like an orangey tan, or you even have like a red undertone with your tan, I know some tanning products give that illusion for some people, then I think red can be quote unquote a little bit riskier just because it doesn't contrast as much. But I think it works decent for most people. I think it looks really, really good on girls with like jet black hair or really dark brown hair. But I think why people probably think it's risky is if it potentially kind of blends with your tan.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason I agree, like red can be risky, is because you have a reddish tone to your skin. Most of the tanning products come off a little bit orange. And then if you add in like a reddish background, the shade of red can be important. Like darker reds, I stay away from because they can just start to blend into the whole thing you got going on there, right? So yeah, it's I like the fire engine. That's a very safe, like that red that pops. That is a pretty safe red. If you start getting into those darker shades, even pink can be a little bit risky, depending on your skin tone and the backdrop. So yeah.
No, when I think of red, I think like that bright fire engine red, right? Yeah, I know there's different tones of it. Same with blues too, right? People go really dark blues, and some people can go like a little bit pinkish purple with it.
Yeah, well, bright red works for blonde. It works for black hair. Like, you know, so Lana wears red. We tried to switch her. We put her in a green suit, and the judges were like, "Stop it!" And then Ari just looks fantastic in red. We're never changing. She's like,
"Oh, that's her color. That's her color." Yeah, I even think too, if you want to do red, like considering when you're designing your suit, making sure that you put on some crystals that are like AB crystals, meaning they have a white background, kind of, which is essentially what makes the suit glisten on stage. So if you don't have any AB crystals, it'll look like a very just like flat one color suit. So adding just some like dimension and some AB crystals will get that red to pop and glisten a little bit more, which can help.
Yeah, if they're gonna have lighting like they've had at Wasatch and this show, suit colors can be, you know, whatever, like, because it really brings out the color on stage. When the lighting is a little duller and the backgrounds are a little more muted, I think it really starts to, you don't want to blend into the background, you want to contrast. So yeah, and especially the darker the tan, the lighter you can go with colors. Like if you get really dark, I've seen girls rock like white bikinis, super light pinks, oranges with good dark skin tone, but that's a risky color unless you have like that epically, like I think India Paulino early in her career wore yellow every year. Like you don't see that anymore.
No, yeah, you don't see that. Same with like Alexandria Ross. She's an example of somebody who wears black on stage, and it's, I mean, always, I think, worn black, and she seems to pull it off really well. I mean, she wore
I
it at
used to
this
love
show, and
black. I used to love that. That's especially if you have like a very white hair, like there's a fair blondes, black
oh yeah,
top.
yeah,
Or if you have black hair, like Liana Gianamore also pulls off black very well. Yeah, listen, you know, the judges will tell you what you feel confident in and what you pull off. It's that to them, they're not judging the suit. They might have a comment, but if they get used to seeing you, like they got used to seeing Daraja and turquoise, 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 and then she throws on a pink suit, they did not like that. A, it made her look much softer than she was, and B, they weren't, you know, it didn't work, and that's one of the first times I've ever heard them say like, don't wear that again. I was like, okay, noted. And she literally won the show the next weekend going back to turquoise. We did come down a few pounds as well, but you know, so like it's pretty rare that I get a feedback from a judge about the suit, but it does happen.
yeah. Well, between like, so did you guys have any surprises, as far as just like to kind of wrap up the little Pittsburgh recap? Any surprises that you guys had as far as people that you thought were, you know, going to place differently at all?
I mean, Ari was the biggest surprise. I mean, you know, obviously coming off 7th at the Olympia, everyone was probably expecting her to place higher, and we were too. We didn't come in as lean as we wanted to, or that obviously that we needed to, but she also just came off a surgery and we're in a really good spot now. So, I mean, I'm actually quite excited for our season because she's just a few pounds off where we need to be. And there's this thing champion athletes have, and this is what this episode is about: how you handle that disappointment. There's two ways that it goes, and I deal with these athletes. You guys have dealt with it yourselves or as your athletes. You either start to question and doubt the organization, the judging, your decision to compete, your coach, the whatever. You just start to go down this rabbit hole, or you go, okay, what do I got to do to be better? And then if you take that second route, that's when you find out. Like a lot of people don't remember Daraja won her first 2 pro shows, went to the Arnold and got 11th. And it was a letdown. And it was like, oh, an aha moment. And that's like when she decided to flip the switch. I mean, she always flipped the switch, but you know, like nobody's ever gone undefeated in this sport. So it's really that first time someone gets, I always say, punched in the face, that you find out if this is the right sport for you.
Right. And I know like we've had the discussion before about how sometimes I think as coaches, like it's awesome when you have a new competitor who right off the get-go like does amazing, you know, maybe wins an overall, does incredible, but sometimes, you know, you kind of worry as a coach because that first time that they get knocked down can be even harder if they start off with all that momentum, right? But I like to, you know, I think a very relevant and recent example that I always like to think about is think of Brittany Gillespie, who I think, so she won Charlotte. She got first place at Charlotte, and I think it was the week before or 2 weeks before. I think it was San Diego. I can't remember. I think she got like 7th or 8th. So it just goes to show how you can literally, and she, you know, before that 7th or 8th placing, she had been placing a lot higher than that. So I can imagine after that show of placing 7th or 8th, it was probably a bit of a letdown for her, right? And she could have very well have, you know, said, oh, maybe, you know, maybe my look isn't right for this season. Maybe I need to, you know, stop prep. But she continued going on, went into Charlotte and won. And now she's qualified for the Olympia. She did very well at Pittsburgh this past weekend. I think she got like 8th, maybe. I know she was in the top 10. So I think that's a great example.
Well, how about Jennifer Dory, the year she won her first Olympia, going into Tampa Pro and getting 4th? You know, in August, she got 4th at a show, placing, you know, behind Issa, Daraja, and Loralee. She gets 4th. You know, she still had to qualify after that. I think she had gotten 5th at the Olympia the year before, or 4th. I have to look it up. Sorry for not knowing that. But, you know, and then what we saw was she went to Nashville and won, and then she got on a roll. And, you know, like, you know, not for nothing. That's what's about to happen with Ari. Like, we had a really good heart to heart yesterday, and I was excited. She handles the sport very well. And so, like, you know, and again, like you said, like when you have these athletes that just come out of the gate and they just win. And the first time they get that non-win, you got to find, and sometimes a non-win can be like fifth or second call outs, or,
Yep.
you know, third call outs, or second at a show that you're supposed to win. That's when you really find out if you're just in it for the celebrations or if you love the process. Yeah, and that's, you know, same with, you know, you can see all the girls at the top of the sport. I mean, Janet Leug, when she won her first Olympia, a lot of people just think that the sport was easy for her because her first Olympia, she got second. But I think it was 6 or 7 years of dropping. She just kept kind of steadily going third, fifth, fourth, sixth, and then boom, she finally wins. Well, what if she was just like, oh, they just don't reward me. I'm just not the girl they want. She never would got that title.
Brad, after she won her first Arnold, I talked to her actually to Orlando show that I saw you at in Garage at. This is a while ago. Right after she won the first Arnold. And I remember she told me, she was like, when she won, she was like, this was like very validating, because she's like, I was almost at the point, like, is this sport even kind of for me anymore? Because everything kind of kept dropping. But all it takes is that one little turnaround, and she didn't quit.
Right? And sometimes it's about perspective, because some girls are complaining that they're not placing well at nationals. Here you have a girl who's always in first call-outs at the Olympia that's like, I'm ready to quit. Whereas I think everybody in the sport would be like, I'd be happy with first call-outs. Well, no, you wouldn't. Not if it was you. I think for the far majority of us in the sport, at least the ones that it's the best for, it's about the progress. It's not about the placing you just got. It's about, okay, what can we do to be better?
Here's the thing. I used to be a sore loser when I first got started in the sport, because I didn't have anyone to help guide me with that. I was the person that complained about the judging. I was the person that looked for every excuse in the book. And that's a big reason that I try to set expectations with all the people that I coach, and I try to be brutally honest with them. I think if you're a coach and you bash the judges, I think you're doing your athlete a disservice. I think that you need to be honest. I think that most people that have bad experiences and bad attitudes necessarily are not the most honest with themselves on how they are, and maybe even their God-given ability with it. And, you know, I wish I would have had someone when I first got started in the sport to not agree with me that I got screwed over, but tell me I just needed to be better and put the work in.
Yeah.
That's where it
because
starts.
I did need to be better.
Yeah.
I did
Lexi,
need to be better.
let's talk about your story a little bit, because you've been chasing that national level physique for a few years here now, and you're not bitching.
No, and I think, like we said something a few minutes ago that like kind of resonates with me, is really kind of pulling back. And, you know, I think it's okay to feel your feels, right? I think that's important. Don't bottle it all up, but of course do it, you know, in a safe manner, in a safe space where you're not going on social media, etc. But, you know, I think for me, it always just helps to kind of pull back and really reiterate, okay, why am I doing this in the first place? Right? Like, the placings are really cool. Yes. The titles are really cool. Yes. But at the end of the day, like show day and those placings, like that is one day. Right. And, you know, I have really learned to kind of pull back and realize, okay, no, I do this because I love this lifestyle. Like, I feel like if I didn't have this lifestyle, I'd go crazy. I love this lifestyle. I love, you know, and now being in this sport for several years now, I look back every year and I think, wow, okay, you know, whether I got a placing I wanted to get or not, I think to myself, oh my gosh, like I have learned so much about myself, about the sport every year, right? Like I'm sitting here today feeling like, oh, I feel like I know a lot, but I know that this time next year, I'm going to look back at this past year and think about how much I've learned about the sport, about myself. And I think that's really what draws me to the sport, is just always being able to improve. There's always something you can work on, right? So I think it's always helped me to, one, just like feel your feels. It's okay to do so. If you don't place how you want to place, feel your feels. And then second, you know, look back and really ask yourself, okay, am I just doing this for the show day and the placing, or do I do this because I love the lifestyle, I love the sport, and I love what it provides me outside of just show day? And that's that's been something I've really, recognized that I love about this sport is I love show day, but I also just love living the lifestyle year round and just always chasing a more improved physically and mentally version of myself year after year.
I almost feel bad for some of my competitors that have super rapid success and then they wash out of the sport within a year or two because they had so much success early on, and then it gets grindy, versus the competitors that I have, like, like Maria Nemeth, who I took to nationals 3 years in a row, just kept missing. We would go into the off season, come back, just miss, go into off season, and then finally to get that pro card for her. I think her journey has been super rewarding for her. Whereas I had a girl a couple of years ago that our second ever show, she got her pro card. She did 3 pro shows and then was done because that was it. She was just, and I'm like, man, like, what's better? The Maria journey that took her 6 or 7 national shows in 4 or 5 years to get the pro card, or the girl that got her pro card in her first season and then washed out of the sport in the next season. So, bodybuilding, yeah, you want to have wins, but they don't have to be wins on stage. They don't have to be wins as a pro card. They can be wins in your pictures. They can be wins in the gym. And that's really, listen, don't get me wrong, I want to win the Olympia. I want to win all the pro cards, but some of my favorite clients will never sniff a pro card or never sniff an Olympia placing, because that's just for a certain select few people, right? But the lifestyle and the sport can certainly be a part of your life forever, and you can continue to get wins.
Yeah, and bodybuilding is the true thing of, it's the journey, not the destination. It's the truest thing with that, because it's not just about the effort you put in. It's honestly, it's about like who your parents are, your God-given genetics. That's something that is a role that plays into it. Your bone structure plays a role in that. You can maximize and be the best that you can be with it. But what's interesting is I feel like this is the only sport to where if people don't win all the time, they just get upset with it. Like, because they work hard, they should be rewarded with victories. And that's not, that's not the way it works.
I think I agree with you there. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle, because I think a lot of competitors, myself included, and I know you guys like are former athletes, right? And in our sports growing up, a lot of times wins come from, not all the time, but it's usually like how hard you work, right? And that's not always the case with bodybuilding. Like, you could be the hardest worker, but that doesn't automatically mean you're going to place better than somebody who's not working as hard, right? And I think that can be a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, but also something you have to consider before you get into the sport as well.
Yeah, I mean, playing sports growing up teaches you great lessons, because there was times when I was a pitcher where I would be asked to throw a fastball on the lower half of the plate, and I would hit my spot and a guy would still rip a double off the wall. I did my job. He was just better than me in that moment, right? And so same thing with bodybuilding. And it's made me enjoy the aspect of coaching and competing in bodybuilding much more. Especially competing for me the last couple of years has been so much more enjoyable, because I literally don't care what I place. Now, deep into prep, I'm like, I want to fucking win. Like, I want to do what I got to do to win. But that's so far down the list of priorities for me for my enjoyment. I remember in Miami last year when they were lining us up for the placings, looking out at the crowd, and I saw a lot of you guys out there, and I thought, fuck, I really want to win. So I'm hoping they don't call me in second. So when they called me in first, I realized, like, okay, I do want to win, but had I got second or third or fourth, it would not have changed my enjoyment for the prep, for the process. But again, I'm not that athlete. Like some of these athletes, when you get to the top, you are doing every little thing in your power to take that next step forward, and I love telling my one of my favorite Daraja stories. We got a placing of second at a pro show where we probably should have won, and it wasn't really that close. And the feedback from the show was, well, you're already Olympia qualified, not the feedback you want to get. And Daraja was like, okay, thank you. Such a great show. We go back to the room, the door closes, and she let the expletives fly, right? Like, so she was a champion in front of everybody, but she still had her moment. And I totally respected that. I'm like, good, this is how you're going to come back better. And she did. And right, like, it's that fire. It's not that you can't feel a certain way. It's about understanding, at least in my opinion, that like that moment doesn't have to define your career. Let it hurt, let it sink in, take some accountability. What can I and we do better? And that leads you to a new place of, okay, What can we do better? Okay, did I really nail my post-show experience? Did I work out as hard in the off season? Did I plan my schedule properly? Like, you know, it's honestly what makes me get better as a coach is getting my butt kicked and going, okay, what do we got to do to be better next time? You know, that's why, you know, I've constantly kind of had these progressive steps forward in my career because I've never just been like, oh yeah, last year I got all these pro cards, cool, I'm good at my job. No, I'm like, okay, what do we got to do to get better? And I think at least our culture, you guys, I know Evan, every single time you've competed, you've come back better. Lexi, every time you've competed, you come back better. Both you guys athletes just continue to rise up. Lexi just had an overall bikini champion this last weekend. So like that is part of our culture. That's truly what I believe is like a part of the way we do things. And I've had athletes that I've had to let go because they were gifted a physique from the gods and had great success, but immediately as soon as they started not succeeding, they started shitting on the sport, the people around them, and I'm like, nope, this ain't gonna work. I can just tell you now.
Yeah. I think there's one thing that really impacts people's perception on that. And there's, you know, a big conversation that there's like too many pro cards that are given out. And I think to some extent, I can absolutely understand that. But that doesn't mean it's still freaking easy to win a pro card. It's still very hard for the vast majority of divisions at the vast majority of shows. There are some, you know, that you can walk in as top 2 at a pro card and it's like a women's physique division that doesn't have the most athletes in there. And there's 3 girls in the show and some people backdoor into that. But that's not the vast majority of circumstances, guys. That is a very rare thing. So when people don't get their pro card, it's almost like, but it's supposed to be easy because everyone says there's so many of them given out. I don't know about you guys, but I can probably say 3/4 of the consultations I get, it's, I want to win my pro card. And these are people, you know, that haven't necessarily ever competed before. Because they just are told, hey, this is easy. Like there's a lot of pro cards given out. And I think another thing to look at, and something I always try to remember, is if you're close to winning your pro card, like something like Maria Nemeth, right? Who got really close a lot of times. And then when I missed my pro card at Nationals a few years back, I remember Paul telling me when I got off stage, he was like, work doesn't change. This is the stage you stand on. And I wasn't even upset. Everyone else was upset. I wasn't upset because I knew I was going to have another shot to do a prep where I knew I could win my pro card and I was going to be in the mix. But once you win that pro card, for most people, getting in that mix to win a show again is going to be a while. So embrace that opportunity because it doesn't come around that much to be able to know you're going to be in the mix to win. It does.
That's usually the conversation I have with an athlete that's very upset. I go, are you going to stop eating healthy? No. Are you going to stop going to the gym? No. I'm like, okay, well then, like you can be upset and let down, but you're still, this is your lifestyle. So just let it kind of dissipate. And then, you know, we'll see where your heart's at in a couple days, weeks, months, whatever the next goal is for that person. But, you know, my favorite phone call or text message or email to get is about a couple days after a show. And they're like, I know they were upset. I know they were let down. And they're like, tell me what I have to fucking do. I'm doing it. I'm like, let's go. I'll tell you.
Love it.
You know, that's, you know, Brittany Hamilton last year, you know, like we weren't getting the placings we wanted early in the season. She shut it down. She's like, they want my legs bigger. She spent the year getting her legs bigger. Now we're, you know, back on stage with the physique. If she would have just bitched and moaned and not listened. And that's another thing I often hear is like, the judges said this, but I want to do this, or the judges don't have like, it's hard to understand when the judges look up there. They're not judging your effort. They're judging the product on the stage in that split second. And I feel like sometimes athletes, coaches, we feel like we're being judged. No, they're comparing you to physiques across many different shapes and sizes and muscularities. That's all that means, right? And sometimes you can be leaner and more muscular, but you can lose to someone who has a little bit better shape and this and that. But that's, you can't get mad at the judges. They help the sport. They're there to talk to you, to help you fix things. One of the judges from Pittsburgh called Brittany Hamilton right after the Pittsburgh to talk to her, you know? So like they're there to help. And I think once you understand that, it really helps you enjoy the sport much more. Because it's, you know,
yeah.
Yeah.
When you realize the judges are not against you and they're there to help you and they want you to be your best, that is a good thing. I mean, there's been judges that give me horrible feedback that I turn around and give them a hug afterwards.
Yeah.
Like, it's because I don't take it personal. It's not personal. It's not me. They're not judging me as a human being. They're judging my physique on the stage at that time.
Yeah.
That's all they're judging.
Right.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. I like to think of it as like, think about when they're behind the judges table and like you come out on stage, or all the other competitors come out on stage, whether they've seen you before or not, or they know you, like, just think about like if you were to just cover up your face, like that's essentially, they're just judging what's below, like your physique, right? It's not that they're judging you personally as an athlete, or judging your efforts, or judging, oh, well, she's competed 10 times before this. She really deserves a win. Like, no, that has nothing to do with it.
Think about it like if you were an artist, right? And you draw or you paint this beautiful picture and it's in an art competition and they're picking the best piece of art. If someone didn't pick yours, you wouldn't look at them and be like, that judge hates me as a human being. You'd be like, they like the other artwork better than mine.
Right.
And that's the way to look at this. It's nothing personal. It's not. It's not. And all these conspiracy theories and stuff that you hear, does it happen? Yeah. I mean, can it happen once in a blue moon? It's some smaller stuff. Yeah. I mean, I've heard some weird things. Is that a common thing that happens at the vast majority of shows? No, it is not.
Well, and that's why we choose the shows we choose. I'm a firm believer in, like, if you don't like something, you've got the freedom to choose another path.
Yep.
When I first came into the sport, before I was included in the conversation with the judges didn't really used to stay after. That wasn't a thing. Now they do. But so I used to hear like, oh, at this show, you have to be sponsored by this company. At this show, you have to train at this gym. That does not exist anymore. These judges travel from city to city. There is no more like, this judge doesn't like me. And I promise you, if you walk out under those lights and you stand out, if they have never seen you before, it doesn't matter. If you fit the criteria and you're what they want, they're going to reward you. It's not a popularity contest. It's not a frequency contest. It's a standard contest. And the sport is very based on meritocracy. Oftentimes the best competitors have been doing it the longest, right? They've been consistent for the longest amount of time. They've continued to change. I mean, if you just look at the top 5, 6 at the Olympia, those aren't new girls that just got into the sport yesterday. They worked their way up from national levels to pro levels to, now you get to that level, it's just hard to knock them off because they have been consistent for so long. And it's not so much the case anymore at nationals, because I feel like the NPC numbers are down, but I feel like for a few years there, like if you go back and look at nationals in 2017, 18, 19, there were girls in like third call outs that 2 years later would be on the Olympia stage. They would go back to the drawing board and put in the work. Those classes had 30, 40, 50 girls. We're not seeing that anymore. National show sizes are way down. So the level of the athletes coming out of the national stage are not as high as they were back then. I don't know if it's just, overabundance of pro cards, or if it's the sport is down from the women's side. I think the men might actually be up right now, but I'm noticing not as deep of lineups at the national stage. Like there'll be a solid first call out. It used to be a solid 3 call outs. It used to be like, how are you in third call outs? You just won an overall last weekend. And now it's like, it's not that way.
And I also want people to kind of think about it like this as well, as if you're newer to the sport and you've been in it just a few years and you get on stage and you just expect to beat everyone, that's the hubris and cockiness of that sometimes like confounds me, because people have been doing this sport a long freaking time, a long time. And if you've been doing it 1 or 2 years and expect to be up there and beating people that have been doing this 5, 6, 7 years, fighting like a Maria Nemeth, who was fighting for so long to get a pro card with that, then that's probably not always the most realistic thing with that. For some people, it is for sure with it.
Well, I used to tell girls, like, if you don't get a placing you like and you quit, then you don't deserve what's on the other side of that. So
I love that.
Years ago, Lauren Dannon-Miller, 2017, we won an overall in, I think it was the Florida Grand Prix, like the first show of the year in Florida. We won the overall, go to Junior USA's and she gets 3rd, right? So we're right there. We go to Junior Nationals, she drops back to 6th. So now it's like, oh my gosh, do we shut the season down? So yeah, we had that option, but instead of quitting, she said, let's regroup. And then we came back to nationals, which was in November at the time, in Florida, and she ends up winning that overall. had she, after dropping from 3rd to 6th at a national show, been like, oh, this just isn't for me, she wouldn't have got that reward, right? That's what's on the other side. And so I like to use those examples as like, you don't know what's about to happen. You can't connect the dots forward. You can only connect the dots backwards. Of course, everyone now would be like, of course, Lauren kept her season going. I promise you, it wasn't. It was a lot of conversation around, oh, maybe it's just not meant for us this year. You know, and I can give you 50 examples of that same scenario. And that's why I said that's my favorite thing to hear from somebody.
I love that.
Is like, what do we got to do? Let's put a plan into place, strategy, and just look at all the options and don't blame others or make excuses.
I love that quote, Paul. I love that quote. If you quit because of a bad placing, you don't deserve what's on the other side of that. I love that.
That is good. Well, I think that's also important. I think it's important if you have an unfavorable placing to take a couple of days also, like afterwards, to just kind of let your emotions come down before you make a decision, right? Because I always say decisions made in a very negative or unfavorable mindset are probably going to be decisions that you regret later down the line. So I like to always just like take a few days after an unfavorable placing, let it kind of soak in, let your emotions kind of come down. That way you can think a little bit more logically and make a better decision from there. And that's kind of the approach I like to take, you know, with my girls too, because most of the time, you know, there's not going to be a crazy timeline that we have to, you know, fall within right after the show. So if they get an unfavorable placing, rather than making up a decision of, okay, what are we going to do next that night or the day after, I like to kind of give them a couple days to sleep on it, let that post-show adrenaline come down, and then we can kind of talk more logically through, okay, what do we want to do next? And usually by that time, people are a lot more, you know, at ease with, okay, I placed this way. No, I didn't like that placing, but here's what I know I need to do to get better. And I do want to continue to move forward and try to get better.
And I think the more knowledge you get in the sport and the more you actually understand it, and the more you understand how things are judged, and the more you can look at yourself objectively with it, the more the hunger is there. Because if you don't get a placing that you want, or you feel like you deserve, then at least for me, you know, the first few shows were different, but after I got with a coach that helped me and understood, and then I was in a relationship with somebody who was very good, and that also helped me kind of understand more about the sport and what the judges were looking for. I was hungry to get back to work after that. I'm like, no, I just need to be better. I just need to be better.
Right.
That was the only thing that ever went through my head, is I just need to be better. Let's get better.
Yeah. And it's hard too, because, you know, there are some, like we always say this, but you can't ever control who shows up at a show, right? So if you go into a show that's huge, right? Or let's say you're in one of the biggest classes, sometimes like those class C's, class D's can be really, really big. You know, that's hard too, right? Because you could go to another show the week afterwards that has just a whole different mix of girls and win the whole show, right? Whereas maybe the week before you were like 3rd in your open class, but a lot of it has to do too with like the mix of people that, you know, you're working with, who shows up, how big the classes are. And so that, you know, that feeds into it too. And that's just something we can never control as an athlete. You can't control how many competitors are going to be in the show. You can't, you know, control how many girls are going to be in your class. So, you know, that's something else too that, you know, we have to consider.
It's that's the sport, and that's what makes it fun. And then you find out if it's a sport is for you very quickly through those experiences. And you might go through ups and downs, but if you're, you know, if your life is based around the gym and you know, living a healthy lifestyle, you don't have to be in prep to be a good competitor. You know, like you can, you know, I find that for me, 2 to 3 years off between, you know, competition seasons is really like reignites my fire for the stage. You know, my early career, when I was having success, I won my pro card at my first try. I did a pro show that, you know, a couple seasons later, I probably competed more frequently, but once I realized my place in the sport, like I'm never going to be Mr. Olympia, I think I started to enjoy the process more than the results. And so there's definitely a journey in the sport. I remember thinking when I was young, you know, well, I was 32 when I did my first show. I remember thinking like, masters, I'm not going to do that. I can't wait to compete at 50, at 55, at 60, at whatever. Like I'm going to compete for the rest of my life at different phases. So like, you know, I've learned to appreciate the sport for its ability to give me a deadline to focus my goals. And then the placings become secondary. And listen, none of us are going to train for second, but understanding that, like you said, Lexi, a lot of the stuff that goes into this sport, it's not just, if everyone works the same level, what's going to separate people? And the higher you go in the sport, the more likely people are working just as hard as you. When you get to that top pro level, I mean, there aren't lazy pros. I mean, there might be some that that are slightly lazier, but they're still living the lifestyle and putting in the work. And it's just, they'll get better and better. And that's the scary thing. When you take someone with elite genetics that finally turns on the work switch, that's when you get, 8-time Olympia champions and that kind of thing.
And that goes back to kind of what you were talking about, Paul, about how, or Lexi, same thing about how, if you get success early in the sport, sometimes it can be incredibly detrimental with that. Because a lot of times you don't know what it takes at the beginning of the sport. And if you have a lot of success early, and especially if the effort's not really there, then the first time you get kicked in the teeth a little bit, things are going to get really, really hard. And yeah, look, I know some top level bodybuilders that take far more liberties than most people in a prep, and far more liberties than most in an off season. They're also some of the fewest or some of the craziest genetically blessed people I've ever seen. Look, I played football at Georgia, and I saw some of the most genetically blessed human beings you have ever seen in your entire life that are running 4.40s, benching 500 pounds and squatting 700 pounds at 19 years old. Some people are just built different, and some people get away with more than others. But understanding that most of us are not freaking like that. Most of us need to do the work, and we're not going to get around that.
Well, and there's a lot to be learned from that work, right? Lexi, like, listen, this sport does not come easy to you. Like, you and I know that. As your coach, I know, like, you're not putting on pounds of muscle every time we take a break, and you're not coming back. You're coming back better, but I think that probably makes you a better coach because you pay attention to everything in your power.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. I always say being an athlete like makes me a better coach, and vice versa. But I also, like, I've learned a lot from my mistakes, and I can share those with my athletes too. And I personally feel like they probably prefer that over me being somebody who's just, won every show I did, not having to have like worked a ton for those shows, because it doesn't make you really relatable either. And I don't know about you guys, but I know that like one of the things that I don't want to say I require it, but one of the things I always like to talk through with future competitors, like I just had a call with the girl yesterday who we're starting this year, but she's going to compete next year. But one of the things I always like to look for in athletes before they compete is like, are they already kind of living the lifestyle? And like, do they already go to the gym? Is this already a big part of their lifestyle? Because I think that if it's already a big part of your lifestyle, competing is kind of just the cherry on top, right? Whereas if you just decide, oh, I want to compete, but you don't really already live the lifestyle, you don't love the lifestyle, I feel like if you get an unfavorable placing and you go into a prep with that kind of standpoint, it makes losing a lot harder. Whereas if you're already living the lifestyle, it already provides just such a positive outlet for you, even if you get an unfavorable placing, I feel like it doesn't hurt as much because you realize, okay, it's more than just show day. Like, I love this lifestyle and I love everything it's provided for me and will continue to provide in the future.
Nailed it. And I think that's, bodybuilding's not always come easy to me. And I think it's made me look at the X's and O's, go back to school, study, surround myself by experts, drop the ego, and put my athletes in a position where they're getting information that doesn't come from my ego, but it comes from my willingness to go, okay, what's the best thing for this person? Not, I need to get all the credit, or, I think that's where a lot of coaches are kind of, they're missing the mark.
I mean, I even had a client, like, I think she told me this a year ago, but she referenced a post that I made like years ago, about like something. It said my best package was my least, or my worst placing, or something like that. And she actually referenced that. And she was like, Lexi, that post that you made, like when I read through that, that is what made me want to hire you, just because I felt like I could relate so hardcore on that level. So that was kind of cool to hear.
And I think that's what makes us all good coaches, is the fact that this sport didn't come easy to any of us. Any of us. I mean, I don't even remember, like 24 shows before I turned pro with it. And when things don't come easy, you got to learn it. You have to understand it.
Yeah.
And you have to know the ins and outs of it. You have to master the mental part of it, the food part of it, the training part of it. Look, I'm not the most genetically blessed person, and none of us are. But we all do pretty good in this because of the effort and the work that we put in, the consistency. The consistency is the biggest part of all of that. I tell everyone, repeatable and consistent is far better than optimal every single day of the week.
Well, and
Every
I
single
have
day.
clients
Right.
that, you know, have come to me from working with other top level pros, and they're like, yeah, it's, I don't think they can relate, right? They're not relatable to my situation. So yeah, I think coaching is a very specific skill set. So, you know, this isn't about coaching, but I think as a coach or a person in this sport, getting beat and coming back better is about not, also, we don't blame the judges if our client doesn't get the placing we want. I might look into something and be like, okay, that seems odd. Who was the judge? What's going on? But I'm never, especially if I'm not there, you know, the only time I'll ever give my feedback is if I'm there in person, and I'll say like, you know, I did have you winning. However, let's talk to the judge and see what their feedback was. And they might have something like, oh, well, in this pose, I saw this. And you go, you know what? You're right. I didn't see that. That judge's table changes things. Not many of us are sitting 4 feet away from the
Oh,
competitor.
yeah.
No.
It is night and day different. Like that's why I try to always get like a center seat as close as I can. But if you're anywhere, if you're sitting in like the auditorium, the ballroom, whatever it is, and you're not in that judge's position, I mean, you have to take what you see with a grain of salt.
The only time I will give my 100% this is how I saw it is if I am in the middle directly behind the judges. I'm talking like 3 to 4 feet behind the judges. If I'm 5 rows behind the judges, I'm not saying anything with it because that makes a good difference. And if any of y'all have been to high level shows with good lighting, then it's different. And if any of y'all been to high level shows with bad lighting, it's even more important to be there in person.
Yeah.
And to be up close, because then you can really see the details. You know, that's kind of the weird thing I always think about the Arnold is kind of how far the judges sit back.
Even the
that
Olympia,
situation.
they sit way back at the Olympia.
You know, and it's I always wonder about that, you know, like the reasoning behind it.
I don't know that there's a reason. I think sometimes it's just the way the venue is set up. Like, because at the Arnold, I know that they actually have people sitting in front of the judges, but I think it's the way the floor comes up and they want to be seated a little higher. They don't want to be looking so much up at the athletes.
Yeah.
But, you know, we noticed that this year at the Arnold, like they were so far back, but they still know what they're looking for, right? Like it's not like,
and they're all seeing the same thing too, right?
Yeah.
They're all seeing the same thing from the same position. It's not like you have one judge that's 2 feet behind the athletes and one that's 40 feet behind the athlete. They're all sitting the same spot. So it's consistent.
Yeah. I try. Yeah. I think it's also important. I know that, you know, we have the opportunity. We all go to a lot of shows where they're in person, but, you know, people who want to kind of pose judgments on, placings if they weren't there, especially when it comes to bikini, you know, you're missing a huge piece of like the posing too. Like if you weren't there in the show and you didn't see that athlete's stage presence, their fluidity, their posing, that's a big part of things too, right? Like you're not just going to win strictly off of your physique. I mean, if you have a great physique, but your posing is really crappy and just looks really awful, well, you know, in your pictures, it may look like, oh, you should have won, but you know, the posing is also the other half of the story as well.
And I'm going to give one piece of advice that will help everyone through all aspects of their life, in relationships, friendships, business, or everything. If you're a competitor or you're just a fan of the sport, instead of trying to make judgments on it, be curious about why things happen. Be curious. Because I can tell you how many people would say, oh, this person deserved to win this show. This person deserved to win this show. And then you see someone like Tyler come out and give a breakdown of it. And it all makes complete sense.
That's been a big benefit to the sport, because I think previous to Tyler doing that on the NPC channel, that was really privy conversations that we would have as coaches and judges after the show, or even, you know, at a seminar or something. Like that was kind of like, oh, okay, now I understand more. Now that he's opening that up, I think it really helps the competitors. I think it also gets away from this idea somehow that coaches hold the keys. Like I didn't like that when I first got into the sport. We were told that certain teams had, you know, extra benefits as far as like their athletes. It's not the case. They want everyone to be at their best. So don't, you know, if you go into a show thinking that, you're already letting yourself get defeated. I mean, you know, it's they want the best athlete on stage to win. You know, Lauren Dannemiller won overall at nationals arguably the biggest NPC show. I had no team back then. I won like 3 pro cards that weekend, but that was my first ever. We weren't sponsoring the show. I'd never even spoken to Sandy prior to that show. That was the first time I ever spoke to her. Was that one.
You hear that one all the time of like, oh, that team sponsors that show. That's why all their athletes are winning. And that has absolutely nothing to do with it.
No. Now that I do sponsor shows, I've been asked that before, and I'll tell you, it has nothing to do. The judges, the promoters, we're simply putting money back into the sport that provides a life for us. We want to provide, the ability for these shows to happen, but at no point are any of these coaches that are sponsoring shows expecting a kickback as far as placings. Now, was that the case 15 years ago? I don't know. I wasn't there, but I can tell you right now, for me, it's just about putting money into the sport. So I've even had coaches be like, oh, I don't like going to the shows that you sponsor because I know your girls are going to do well. Listen, my girls are going to do well everywhere. I'm a fucking beast at this. Like, this is all I focus on, is winning.
And most shows
that's why you should be worried, not because I sponsored.
Right. Yeah. And most shows have multiple like teams sponsoring. I know this past week, like looking at the backdrop, I mean, we were up there. There was multiple other teams up there too. Yeah. So it's not that just like one team has exclusivity for each show. Like, that's not how it works. No. And like, even a good example is this past weekend in Pittsburgh, the one, the NPC overall, I'm pretty sure she's self-coached, like not even on a team. So like, it does not matter when it comes to.
It was her first ever NPC show. She's never even sniffed it. So yeah, there's zero importance to that. For me, it's just a way of putting myself in a position to give back to the sport that's done a lot for me. It also, like when you sponsor the show, you get some backstage passes. There's some perks that go along with it. The promoter knows your name. So you are building relationships in that regard, but it's not a tit for tat.
The promoter has zero impact on the outcome of a show too, like zero.
They don't judge their own shows. Yeah.
And let's think about this just as pure, just numbers, right? If you're sponsoring a show, you probably have a good amount of athletes, and you probably have a good amount of athletes in the show, which if you have a good amount of athletes in the show, then your chances of having someone win goes up. So it's literally just pure math a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you sponsor shows and you have teams, you've probably been doing it longer, and you probably understand it a little more. And you probably attract a little bit higher quality athlete too at times. I mean, there's a bunch of factors. It's like correlation is not causation. It's not the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this topic? I feel like it was a good one, to talk about today, especially with the season kind of picking up. I know we had Pittsburgh this past weekend. We have New York Pro this weekend. That list is out now too. So anything you guys want to talk about there real quick?
No, I think the only story is Nick off the list because he didn't put his contract in, or did they just omit his name off the list on the internet? Actually, you know what? Let's go to IFBB Pro right now because they actually have the competitors on these pages. Do you have it up?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick and say I was actually really surprised to see like how small the bikini list was. Just because I know it's the weekend after Pittsburgh Pro, but so many girls were at Pittsburgh Pro, and they would be ready to jump in New York this week if they wanted to do.
When Amy announces she's doing it, that kills it for a lot of girls, because a lot of those girls are chasing their qualification. I promise a lot of those girls will be at Clash in Miami.
Yeah, because those are upcoming as well. Yeah, I definitely think
men's bodybuilding open. Nicholas Walker is on there. Okay. So it was just an error on that.
Oh, you do have to be careful on those lists that some accounts on Instagram post. I have noticed there's some errors in those, so I just always defer to the IFBB website. Those are always right. Yeah. Oh, and so another thing to mention really quickly too, because this episode will come out on Thursday, is by this time, I believe our tickets will be available for our Texas seminar. So that is going to be the second weekend in August. And I believe those go on sale tomorrow. So that'll be the day before this comes out. And we do have, I think Jess said, that 35 limit. So I'm mentioning this because if you do want to come, it is going to be capped at a certain amount. So get your ticket as soon as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a fun one. Big event this year. I talked to Freddie. I'm excited to come out for that. He was DJing at the Pittsburgh Pro.
Last. Yeah, it's going to be like a whole expo. And actually, didn't Tyler announce that Pittsburgh next year is going to be a little bit more of like an expo type of deal?
Yeah, he basically said they're moving to a new location. It's going to be a full-on expo. I'll be curious to see how that goes, because that's not a, like, I wouldn't call that a very well attended show. Like the NPC numbers were not very big. You know, the
Which
open
is so
bikini classes were like 2 to 4 per class. Maybe some of the men's
yeah.
classes were bigger, but I mean, I think they told me they had less than 80 total NPC. I will say the one thing about doing it in Pittsburgh is that is the home of the IFBB. So you get everyone coming in. So if they turn it into an event, maybe they'll get more people turning up. I know I'm going to bring, you know, I love bringing my athletes. I brought Kelby, who will be turning pro this year. You know, I'm going to bring talent to that show, because there is no other show where you get every single Olympia judge on one panel. That's it. If you want to get feedback from Tyler, Sandy,
Absolutely.
Etzela, but they're all there. One shot.
I know. Ever since you said that like a couple years ago, Paul, I know you've always said like I don't understand either, like why the MPC portion is always smaller, because there is not another show where you're going to get all those judges in one place. So, and it's a great show overall. The venue was great. Pittsburgh was a neat town. It was cool to be able to see like the whole city skyline from the top of our Airbnb, even though we didn't really hang out on the rooftop a lot. But it's a neat town. It was a fun experience.
Really funny, this New York Pro list, every class is deep except bikini.
Except bikini.
There's like 20 open bodybuilders, 20 open 212, 25
bodybuilding
physique, classic physique. Women's bodybuilding is a little smaller, but that division is kind of not as robust as some women's figure. I mean, I'm not counting, but that's got to be close to 30 there. Bikini looks like it's about 12. Women's physique is about 10.
Wellness list.
Where were all these wellness girls at Pittsburgh? This is a huge.
How many wellness girls are on the list?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I feel like that's way more. I feel like it's a few more than. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say the open bodybuilding list is a very impressive list for this New York Pro.
And they did up the prize money on this one, didn't they, a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like 50,000, I think, which is
see the names I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with
Tonio Burton. Do you know Tim Budashed?
I know the name.
He did the Tampa show. He's a super nice guy from Germany. Really nice dude.
Did we meet him in the gym?
Very much improved.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know this guy, Quentin
Araya. Oh
my gosh. If that guy has improved, he is dangerous.
He's improved a ton. He's working with Matt Jansen too.
Fitzwater. He's
Angel Calderon. People don't even realize he's got second at 212 Olympia half a dozen times, it seems like.
Right.
And no one's even talking about him. You have
Justin
Quentin
Rodriguez has been off the last couple shows.
Yeah. I didn't know he was doing the show. Of course, Martin, Justin Rodriguez, and then Stuart Sutherland looks very good.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see how he looks. And then of course Nick. So
Nicholas brings the A game. I don't think it's a battle.
No, Nick is. I don't see anybody remotely beating Nick here. No.
Very exciting. All right, guys. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for how to handle getting your butt kicked. Listen, it's going to happen. As an athlete, as a coach, I got my butt kicked last weekend in Pittsburgh. Right. I'm not here bitching about the placings. I'm putting in the work to make sure I'm better for the next show. That's it. If you can't do that, this is not, you got to have some, I don't want to say thick skin, but you've got to be able to like take the hit, assess, and then move forward. You can't start blaming. Bad news.
Here's the difference, Paul, is like, I talked to you, after the show, and you were like, yeah, it sucks and it hurts, but you didn't blame anybody for it. You were like, we need to get feedback and improve where we need to improve. It wasn't, we got screwed, we got this, we got that. You're not calling judges and saying you got it wrong, which happens with people.
Yeah.
It's not like that. It's not like that with you. And that's a lot of respect and direction with that, man.
Yeah, you handled it very well. Ariana handled it very well too, because I remember when she walked down before finals and you asked her how she felt, and she was, I'm sure she was a little bummed, but she handled it extremely well. She's like, you know what? I'm fine. I know what, needs to be done. So you both handled it extremely well.
I'll tell you this. like every time, this is what I told Ari yesterday when we talked. I said, every time something like this has happened, things haven't gone my way, our way, something really good has come out of that. Like, you know, I think about the year that Daraja had gotten 6th at the Olympia. We started our season at Tampa and we got 5th. And everyone was like, oh, this is Daraja's show. It's over. Amy won that show. That tells you how good and consistent Amy's been.
Yeah.
We didn't bitch. We didn't complain. We came out and we got 1st the next weekend. Then we went to the Olympia and got freaking 4th that year, beating everybody that we had lost to. Would we have done that if we just said, oh man, 5th at our first show? That's not good. No. And I promise you, you just, like, Ari is about to do her 11th show of her life. I promise you this next one is going to be, you know, a much different, you know, we're now coming to like slit throats. She's no longer Mr. and Mrs. Nice Girl. So it's going to be, I'm excited. I'm excited. Yeah.
Oh, I want to see Ari as
always-
slit throat girl.
I was gonna say,
I
I
can't
don't
picture
think I
this, and I want to
can
see it
either.
though.
I just mean like her attitude is like
Killer.
we're leaving no stone. Yeah. That's
Kill 'em and tell.
it. And that's exciting for me. And I think it's, and you know, all talk aside, nothing matters till we hit that stage again, but it's going to be an exciting return.
Yep.
I know it will be.
Absolutely.
And Brittany too. Brittany's going to come back, you know, guns blazing too, where, you know, she's a different, her mindset is completely different this year. Whereas last year she was emotionally wrecked by not placing higher. This year she's been like, okay, now what? Now what? Now what? And I'm just like, man, it's exciting for me because that's what takes to succeed in the sport. It's very much about who takes the feedback, who improves, who doesn't just get lost in their feelings and 3 weeks later comes out and goes, oh, I've wrecked my season. No.
Absolutely.
All right. Welcome to the Pro Physique Code. Get your butts to Dallas. Go on our events page. Book your tickets. We have 35 in person. We're all going to be there along with Daraja. We're going to be talking. Steven will be there too. We're going to be doing the expo on Saturday, seminar on Sunday at Hidden Gym. And that's it.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah. Be there or be
fun.
square.
You know it.